Welcome to today's Explainer. When we look at massive multi-billion-dollar fast food chains today, we usually just assume they were built on a foundation of flawless execution, genius original concepts, and immaculate corporate planning. But what if I told you that one of the biggest restaurant empires in the world was actually built on a foundation of chaotic failures, incredibly bad financial decisions, and, well, blatantly copied concepts? Yep. Today, we are unpacking the wild, untold truth of how Burger King actually started.
It really makes you wonder, right? What exactly is the secret to building a multi-billion-dollar fast food empire? Is it a revolutionary menu? A flawless supply chain? Well, peek behind the curtain of this brand's early days, and you'll find a messy reality that stands in stark contrast to the polished corporate perfection we've come to expect. And honestly, the true answer to this question, at least for this company, might just shock you.
Because the secret to Burger King's massive global success was essentially stolen ideas and a hatchet. I know, it sounds totally unbelievable, but this is a truly chaotic underdog story. The origins of this fast food giant are literally filled with rage, broken machines, and shamelessly copying the competition. So let's trace this wild journey right back to the very beginning.
To understand how all this happened, we've got to transport ourselves back to the early 1950s. The car hop craze was peaking, and two brothers had just pioneered a highly profitable assembly line kitchen called the Speedy Service System, which, spoiler alert, was McDonald's. Well, two guys in Florida, Keith Kramer and his stepfather Matthew Burns, visited that single McDonald's location, and they were absolutely blown away by the efficiency and the profits. They decided right then and there, we're going to copy this highly profitable model. This brilliant realization led to the founding of their own startup in Jacksonville in 1953, which they initially called Instaburger.
Now, Keith and Matthew didn't have the intricate operational system that McDonald's had built. Nope. Instead, they relied entirely on some culinary equipment they stumbled across during their research: Miracle Instamachines. They bought this automated conveyor oven that used electric heating elements. Basically, buns went in one way, raw beef went in the other, and 90 seconds later, a cooked burger slid right into a vat of condiments. Boom! It could crank out 400 burgers an hour. They were so confident in this technology that they named their entire company after it, hence Instaburger.
Okay, let's really dive into this, because while those machines sounded great on paper, the actual customer experience was a total disaster. Back then, people were used to waitresses bringing food directly to their cars and then paying afterward. But at Instaburger, you had to order at one window, pay up front, which was super uncommon at the time, take a numbered ticket, walk over to a completely different window, and then, more often than not, you had to repeat your entire order all over again to the clerk. It was a painfully clunky ordering process that completely alienated their early customers.
But hey, despite this messy reality, the founders were incredibly confident. Actually, scratch that. They were overconfident. In 1954, they were sending out franchise flyers, making this bold, audacious claim, the greatest advancement in food service in the last 50 years. But the reality? It was falling dramatically short of the marketing. Those highly touted Miracle Instabroilers were agonizingly unreliable. We're talking breaking down every few days. Plus, their burgers cost 18 cents, which was losing out to competitors who were selling better burgers for just 15 cents. Long story short, the business was floundering.
So enter the real heroes of our explainer. Down in Miami, a guy named David Edgerton had inadvertently become the brand's very first franchisee. Now, David was an ideas guy. He actually sketched the original King logo, but he was basically broke and absolutely terrible at accounting. He desperately needed a partner with capital, so he pitched James McClure. James was a Cornell graduate, a careful restaurateur, and someone who was looking to build a multi-store fast food chain. The two men clicked immediately. They shared this grand vision for the future of dining.
David had enthusiastically pitched James that his Miami store was making a healthy 28% profit. Sounds great, right? Well, James naturally asked to look at the books, and David handed him a literal peach basket stuffed with loose, unorganized receipts and outstanding bills. Just a peach basket. After James painstakingly went through these peach-scented records, he discovered a shocking truth. Instead of a 28% profit, the store was actually operating at a massive 56% loss. Yikes.
Astonishingly, James still decided to invest his life savings. He became 50-50 partners with David, truly believing in the long-term potential of building a chain. But what they did next was completely baffling. They were drowning in debt and saddled with these unreliable machines, right? Well, they managed to secure a $65,000 investment from a wealthy friend. And instead of paying off their existing loans or, fixing their broken operations, they unbelievably blew that capital on opening 3 more locations. They basically trapped themselves in a chaotic debt spiral, duplicating a deeply flawed system.
So the crucial takeaway here is that they had rapidly expanded a business that fundamentally just did not work, which leads us to a pivotal high-tension moment. Seriously, what happens when your core technology completely fails during the lunch rush? Because one day, right in the middle of a busy shift, James and David heard the familiar, tragic sound of the electric Instabroiler grinding to a complete halt, yet again.
And David, he absolutely lost it. He was so enraged by this temperamental oven that he grabbed a hatchet from his toolbox and literally smashed the machine to pieces. He flat out refused to buy another faulty electric oven. Instead, he spent the next 3 weeks working with a local mechanic to invent a better machine that ran on gas instead of electricity. And this is what's so amazing. This brilliantly illustrates the beauty of accidental innovation. Because by switching to gas, David inadvertently invented the reliable flame broiler. That pure moment of rage gave birth to the iconic, flame-broiled taste that defines Burger King to this very day.
Okay, so they had fixed their technology, but they still needed a product that really stood out. James took a trip up to Jacksonville to see how the original founders, Keith and Matthew, were doing. And man, it was a disaster. The founders had pivoted to movable stainless steel buildings, blaming their actual locations for bad sales. James just stood there and watched their shiny new store attract exactly 0 customers in 2 hours. 0. But while walking just 1 block over, James spotted a rundown local burger stand drawing massive lines all the way down the street.
James got in that line and discovered they were selling these massive, over-the-top burgers. He and David tried one and agreed it was the best burger they'd ever eaten. So what did they do? They shamelessly copied it. They developed their own version, a 1/4-pound beef patty on a 5-inch bun, absolutely buried under a mountain of toppings. James named it the Whopper. Now, they took a massive gamble by pricing it at 37 cents, which was more than double the standard 15-cent fast food burger at the time, and slapped "Home of the Whopper" on all their store signs. It was a huge risk, but it was an instant, massive hit that completely turned their Miami business around.
While David and James were finding incredible success down in Miami with the flame broiler and the Whopper, the original founders up in Jacksonville were going bankrupt. By 1959, Keith and Matthew defaulted on their loans. The loan holder, a man named Ben Stein, ended up with the company, but he knew absolutely nothing about fast food. So, James saw his opening. He struck a deal to take over global control of the entire company, giving Stein 15% of revenues in exchange. Just like that, David and James made the incredible leap from franchisees to franchisers. They immediately dropped the word Insta from the name and officially became Burger King.
But the sheer scale of the battle they were stepping into was totally daunting. By 1962, Burger King was definitely making progress, but McDonald's was an absolute juggernaut. I mean, they were opening 107 new stores compared to Burger King's 7, and pulling in over 6 times the profit. But James, he was relentlessly aggressive. He wanted to close this massive gap and genuinely believed that, within just a few years, Burger King could actually catch McDonald's.
But then, in 1965, McDonald's went public, and their IPO absolutely crushed the race. To put the sheer success of that IPO into perspective, if you had invested just $1,000 in McDonald's initial stock offering back then, it would be worth over $6 million today. That massive influx of public capital meant the sprint for supremacy was practically over before it even started. James quickly realized that if Burger King was going to survive against a giant like McDonald's, they desperately needed massive corporate backing.
And that realization led directly to a major turning point, the 1967 merger with the Pillsbury Company for $18 million. Now, this deal made James and David incredibly wealthy, but it created a massive rift between the two partners. See, James believed they absolutely needed Pillsbury's deep pockets to finance growth and fight McDonald's. David, on the other hand, wanted to stay independent and retain total control of their baby. When it became clear that Pillsbury was going to heavily meddle in their day-to-day operations, David grew frustrated and fully resigned from the company just 2 years later, in 1969.
This built into even more frustration for James, too. He had merged with Pillsbury for explosive growth, but Pillsbury actually pumped the brakes. Because Burger King had expanded so fast under David and James, the franchise locations were wildly inconsistent. So by 1972, Burger King's new store openings actually dropped to 91 a year, while McDonald's was out there opening a staggering 365. Deeply disappointed by this slow growth approach, James ended up stepping down from his role as CEO. But listen, Pillsbury did have a plan to tame the wild energy of those early startup days. They launched Operation Phoenix. They boldly poached a high-ranking executive named Donald Smith directly from McDonald's. Smith came in and implemented the exact kind of rigorous standardization that McDonald's was famous for. Corporates started buying and leasing the land to franchisees for better control. They brought in the menu, and they finally standardized the store designs and the customer experience. It brought some much-needed order to all that startup chaos.
And this solid foundation ushered in the modern corporate era. Ownership of Burger King has bounced between major investment firms ever since. From a $1.5 billion buyout by TPG Capital to a record-breaking IPO in 2006, all the way to its current place under Restaurant Brands International, merged with Tim Hortons. But make no mistake, despite all this high-level corporate shuffling over the decades, this company's current valuation of up to $10 billion was entirely built on the relentless determination of James and David back in the 1950s.
Which brings us to a fascinating conclusion for today's explainer. Think about it. Keith and Matthew stole the Speedy system from McDonald's. David and James stole the Whopper concept from a local burger stand. And their iconic flavor? It only exists because a frustrated guy smashed a machine with a hatchet. It leaves us with this really provocative question to ponder. In business, is fearless execution of stolen ideas actually more important than having the original concept? Does Burger King's messy copycat history prove that taking bold risks and adapting on the fly is the true secret to scaling an empire? Really think about that next time you order a Whopper. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.